Hello, and welcome to the Indie Hour. This is going to be a little special bonus show I got for you. So, the idea of this bonus show is we are a little more than halfway through the year. So, I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about and, just maybe relive a little bit of the music that has been released so far this year, us being about a little more than halfway through the year. So, I'm going to kind of break it down by, months, like what came out this month and stuff, because that to me is kind of the, it's the best way that I could categorize it and stuff, and, there's some things from inside the genre of indie and alternative, but there's one or two from outside of the genre, which is fun. So getting things started off with the beginning of the year, January there wasn't anything really on my radar particularly big. There was a lot of anticipation, at least for me, for two records that had been announced in 2019. That being Tame Impala's record, The Slow Rush, which was coming out in February, and then in March, Group Love was planned to release Healer. Those are two bands that I have loved over the years. I think I've gone on record before saying Group Love is my favorite band at this time, and it still is. So that was January. I don't know if that's usually the case for the music scene. I know that's a big thing for like movies, like the end of summer usually is when there's no good movies released and stuff. I think that's why Straight Outta Compton, the NWA biopic, was released and did so well. It was breaking all these records, but that was because nothing was released in August, so that might be the case with January for music. But February, we got Tame Impala, The Slow Rush. Now, the release of this album, leading up to it, there was some decent singles released, but it wasn't until the single Posthumous Forgiveness. I forget when around he released that, but as soon as that thing came out, I knew, you can't predict these things, but I had a really good feeling that we were in for a special record. I've been a big fan of Tame Impala since a little before Currents and stuff. I have seen him in 2016 put on a really great show, but there was some big anticipation from this album. And let's see, wow, everything. So when this album got released, it was just everything I wanted from a Tame Impala record. It was unique sounding, it was really personal, a variety of sounds. It had those really upbeat, super fun stuff, but then it had more somber reflection stuff. A really good artistic expression, in my opinion. I will say, too, we're only a couple months into the year, but this has still remained, this got released on Valentine's Day, funny enough, and this has been my favorite record so far for 2020. I don't know if anything will beat it out. I've still enjoyed it to this day, but we'll have to see if anything beats that out. So that was my big release for February. March, March associating with some real world stuff too. March, unfortunately, was the time that, at least in my eyes, everything started shutting down due to the virus. I did my last radio show, I worked my last shift and stuff. So March was kind of obviously a terrible month with COVID really ramping up and pushing us into quarantine. But March, also, I associate March with Group Love, my favorite band, releasing their album called Healer. And yeah, just everything with the shutdown. So funny enough, my last radio show was me talking about this album, and I have not done a radio show since, unfortunately. So this was the last record I discussed on air for my radio show. So just crazy to think that, at least in my mind, that's when everything started to shut down, unfortunately, is when this album came out and stuff. So being released, I want to think about how I ramped up to it and stuff. So the first single they released, The Leader, was such I was so excited when that single came out. And there was talks about a new album and stuff. That was such... The Leader, if you haven't heard it, is a very it's it's got a good message, one, but also two, it's so high, it's so upbeat, it's really upbeat, and it's really got an interesting message. So I was in love with it. I was in love with the idea of, hey, if this is where they're taking this album, I am all for it. And funny enough, when the album came out, like, my initial reaction of it wasn't anything like, it was positive. I still enjoyed the record, but I was like, I didn't know what to kind of make of it. I mean, I was really, it was just kind of mediocre to me, which is unfortunate. But I did say, again, a prediction that I definitely got right. I felt like this was an album that I really had to, like, I had to give it a couple more listens and stuff, and, you know, once I got through it a couple more times, I definitely enjoyed it a lot more, which I think is the case for some things, movies, albums, what have you. But in the end, I did end up really enjoying this one. So that leads us to April, when I started up this show. Obviously, with everything going on in March, I was looking to, you know, do something with, you know, express my music interest in some sort of way. So I started up this show. It's been a good distraction at times. Some weeks, you know, it's been a little tough to come on and talk just about various things. But yeah, so April, the big album for me this month was, and I think for most people, Fiona Apple, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. This got some, so I really enjoyed this record for a number of reasons. But was interesting about this one was the mainstream love this got. For instance, Pitchfork, which is like a music publication, like they do album reviews. I think they used to be a magazine, but I know them for the website and stuff. They gave this album a 10 out of 10, which, like, I was completely surprised at. I don't know if it exactly deserves that, but I can say the record is absolutely great. And it was cool to see, like, mainstream publications and, you know, talk about this album and discuss it. I thought that was really interesting. So we also had, I would say the other big release was The Strokes also released an album. I wasn't as crazy about it. Like, I thought it was okay, but I think when you have a band like that who first album came out in 2001, and then for them to be still making music in 2020, I think that's kind of cool. Just the fact that you have new material from a band like that. So that's what I generally thought about that. May. So there was a lot of big releases, and there was a lot of big releases I did not like. Car Seat Headrest is Making a Door Less Open. You had 1975's Notes on a Conditional Form. I don't want to harp on the bad stuff. I've already talked about those albums, and again, these are all just my opinions and stuff. I never really had any huge, Car Seat Headrest, I was looking forward to that album, and, you know, same sort of complaints, just really, they felt incomplete. They felt all over the place. I've already given my criticisms of that album, so why don't I move on to the stuff I did like? And that comes from my favorite punk band, which I've talked about, favorite modern punk band, I should say, Days and Days, Show Me the Blueprint. That was, I mean, it's tough. To pick favorites off of that one, it is, they are one of my punk favorites, I should say. That album is angry, emotional, heartfelt. It deals with a ton of issues. Sobriety was the biggest one for me. It felt, too, that this was their most organized and, you know, compared to their last record, it was so much more well-produced. I don't know if they switched up producers, but the album was fantastic. It had some comparisons to probably their biggest release, which was in 2013. That's when I first discovered them, Rogue Taxidermy. It had some complaints to that, which I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay, this album's pretty darn good. The other big release for May was a band that I'm always trying to drum up hype for, because I think they need, like, well, not that they need, but a band that I think deserves more credit in the scene. Chicano Batman with Invisible People. They dropped a little bit of their more traditional psychedelic elements in favor of a more modern sound, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I absolutely loved the record, and more or less, it was a really good record. I should say May 2 was also, unfortunately, the killing of George Floyd, which I've talked about and which people still continue to fight for. That was unfortunate that obviously went down. I think May 25th was the date. And that brings us to June, this past month. Going off the George Floyd stuff, we saw, not necessarily big albums released, but we saw a lot of powerful protest songs and just anger about the situations that have been going on in this country for a very long time. And a lot of that came from the rap scene. The biggest album within the indie genre, I would have to say, was Phoebe Bridges' Punisher. It was sweet, solemn sounding. She recorded it, I think she is slowly becoming a staple in the indie scene. She's only released really 2 big full-length albums up to this point, but I see a bright future, hopefully, for her. And so the last week we got, to tie it all together, I guess, we got Haim, Women in Music Part 3. This is a great album. Anytime I talk about Haim, I have to rave about the bass. Similar to what I talked about with Days and Days, the overall production of this album is super stellar. Final thing is for the future. And just to wrap things up in this video, I do want to talk about the future. And so coming out, I don't think they've released a date because it got delayed. But my hope is for the Killers album to be really good.